I'm Ruth Silverman. I'm the neurodevelopmental pathway lead for CAMHS, and a little bit about background. I'm a trained nurse, trained midwife, trained health visitor. I'm also a sleep practitioner as well. And my lovely colleague.
Hello, I'm Teresa, and I'm the advanced clinical practitioner apprentice within the neurodevelopmental team. And I'm a non-medical prescriber and also a mental health nurse by background, and I've been a nurse for a very, very long time. So let's carry on.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've both got, we both go to sleep as well.
Yeah,
like everybody else. Everyone else.
Looking forward to that today.
Oh yes, oh yes. So this is the third session that we've done today, so really big welcome to all of you. And we're going to make sure it's really lively and interactive as much as we can, because we do realise that this time of night you're starting to feel a little bit sleepy. So our first poll is, what do you think? Are you a good sleeper or not? So we'll just let you answer that. And while you're answering that, I'm just going to ask the same question to Teresa. Are you a good sleeper, Teresa?
I am now. I didn't used to be. So I had years of being really quite having kind of chronic insomnia, where 4 hours was pretty much all I would get. But as I learned so much around sleep, I actually changed my whole sleep pattern. So now that I do sleep well.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? As the more you learn about sleep, all of a sudden you think, right, okay, what can I change? How can I make this better? I need my sleep. And one of the other things we were talking about in one of the previous ones is that we're actually all experts in sleep because we all do it. And you can look around and everybody walking on the street has been to sleep. So when we're talking about experts by experience, we've all got that experience. Oh, this is really interesting. Yeah. Okay, so our early morning session, we had very similar scores, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Our midday session, it was the opposite way around. We had more people saying they were good sleepers. I wonder if it's because we're getting closer to bed, people are getting more aware of their sleeping habits. I'm not quite sure, but that's really interesting, isn't it? So 57% of you said you didn't think you're a good sleeper. So our next question is, did you get enough sleep last night? And we'll talk a little bit more about what is enough sleep. And did you sleep well last night, Teresa?
I did, actually. I got a good 6.5 hours last night, so that was fine. How about you?
Yeah, not too bad. The cat came in at around, I think, 5:30, 6 o'clock, but she wasn't too noisy, so that was okay. Because you know what happens when the cat or a child wakes you up, you start to move around just to let them on the bed. And they tend to sleep better than you do because you change your position so you don't wake the cat up. How ridiculous.
I think there's an advantage with cats because they can kind of look after themselves, but I've got a cat and a dog, and the dog gets me up and then he wants to go outside, so I have to go out.
Wow. Oh dear. Oh dear. I think we need to do a bit of sleep training here because it looks like we've got quite a clear 70% didn't get a good sleep last night. Okay, let's have a little bit more of a talk about sleep then. So I suppose the first question is, what is sleep? So this is a lovely little quote from Matthew Walker, and it says what it is. It says what it says on the tin. Sleep is the single most effective thing that we can do to reset our brain and our body and our health each day. And we know that. And one of the things that we've talked about is the fact that, when you've not had a good night's sleep, you wake up the next morning, you feel groggy, you feel a bit more irritable, you're much more sensitive to things, and it's really hard to focus. Things that you thought about yesterday have gone from your mind because you've forgotten them, and it's quite hard to actually work through the day with that feeling of, I just needed a little bit more sleep and it would have been okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we all know that feeling because we've all had that experience, haven't we?
Yeah, definitely. And one of the interesting things is as well, what does sleep actually look like? So we tend to do pretty much the same thing every night. When we go to sleep, we have to pretend to go to sleep so we can get to sleep. It's the first thing, which I always think is quite a bizarre thing to say. but we do. And we lie down, tend to lie down, and we close our eyes. Although my granddad, he used to sleep slightly with his eyes open, which is quite spooky actually. And our muscles are really relaxed and our consciousness is practically suspended. And the only other time that your consciousness is pretty suspended is if you're under a general anaesthetic, but we do it by choice and by necessity every single night. And it's quite a strange thing. And cats and dogs do it, and you can see them as well asleep and having the same sort of the dreams and things like that. Oh, Professor, right, go on, you can say it this time.
So Professor Rechtschaffen.
Oh, that's much better than me. Much better. And he devoted his life to researching around sleep. He did a lot of work around insomnia. He did a lot of work looking at naps as well, which is a really interesting subject, and all of the different kinds of sleep-wake cycles as well. And he came up with this really nice quote, which I just think is lovely. You know, if sleep does not serve an absolute vital function, then it's the biggest mistake that evolutionary process has ever made, which is quite true, isn't it? You know, let's face it, if we didn't need it, we wouldn't be doing it and we wouldn't be worrying about it.
And nor would all the other animals as well.
No. And we were saying it's one of those things, you know, we could talk about the weather quite a lot, especially in Britain. We do talk about the weather. We like to do that. But you can also always have a conversation about sleep.
Absolutely.
So if you're in a social situation, you don't know what to talk about, you can always ask about someone's sleep and they'll go, oh yes, and they'll be able to tell you a story about their sleep as well. Or their dreams is the other good subject.
Dreams.
So why do we need sleep? Well, there's lots of reasons, and I'm going to play a little. There we go. Yeah, it's going to play. Tell me if you can hear it, Teresa.
I will.
Hear it?
Yep. Getting enough sleep is vital for your physical, emotional, and mental health and well-being. Too little sleep leads to lackluster and wrinkled skin, plus bags under the eyes. Sleep deprivation raises daily blood pressure and your heart rate, putting you at risk from heart disease, strokes, diabetes, and other health problems. We're grumpier, snappier, and have less patience when we've not had enough sleep. Losing sleep erodes concentration and problem-solving ability. Each hour of sleep lost per night is associated with a temporary loss of 1 IQ point. Lack of sleep causes changes to the way our brain functions in areas of impulse control and decision-making. Take care of your physical, emotional, and mental health and well-being by getting good, quality sleep every night in a comfortable, supportive bed.
And that's from the Sleep Foundation, and they've got lots of little videos that are really nice, and they're quite small and easy to watch as well. Some really good tips.
A lot of really good information on there, don't they?
Definitely. Okay, should we talk about brain function and memory and learning?
Absolutely. So brain function and memory is consolidated. So at night when we go to sleep, part of the process of sleep is that our brain is like a giant filing system, and it starts to sort out all that information that we've had in the daytime, and that's particularly important when it comes to our children and their learning. And memory is a vital role in that. So actually what we get is the filing system going on and laying down what we've learned during the day and organising that. And sleep deprivation results in poor academic outcomes. And as you heard then, that actually your IQ actually drops if you're lacking sleep. And what we know is every 15 minutes of sleep that you increase, actually your IQ goes back up. So it's really important. And then you've got that unlearning theory, which complements that process by handling the clutter. And I think if you think about, if you're not sleeping well and you don't get enough sleep, there's always that constant pressure that's going on inside your head, where you kind of feel overloaded all the time. You can't sort things out. Your kind of brain is muddled and you really can't think straight. And when we sleep, what part of that unlearning theory is actually handling that clutter, removing the non-essential information and putting things in that order and helping with that filing. And therefore, it just absolutely facilitates and enhances that learning, but also reduces that stress level as well.
And they've done lots of research about this, haven't they? Brain function,
yeah.
memory and learning. And for instance, they've done, I mean, the poor medical students, I'm sure they get get tasked to do all of these research groups, don't they? So they had one group where they were allowed to sleep and one group that weren't, and they were giving them cognitive skill tests and maths and different things to do and learn before they went to sleep, and then after they went to sleep they did a recall and tested that knowledge and compared them with the group that was allowed to sleep and the group that wasn't allowed to sleep, and they found there was a significant difference in what they could remember and what they had learned after the ones who had had the sleep. And that was even if they'd had a nap. They've done tests. If you have and this is where we're going to say you will need a siesta in the afternoon, if you have a power nap, a 20-minute power nap can actually help retain learning, and testing after a nap has demonstrated you can improve learning by 20 to 40%.
And there was quite a big fad, wasn't there, for power napping not so long ago. There was quite a lot of chat on social media and things around it. My husband, when he was working, he's retired now, but he used to tell me about how he used to nip out to his car in his break and actually have like a 20-minute nap in his car, and the radio would last the 20 minutes, then he'd wake up and go back into work. And I used to think, wow, how do you do that?
It's amazing. I mean, what a good idea. I think we should also push for that and say, I mean, they do siestas, don't they, in not many of the hot countries, everything closed down and then they come back. So yeah, it works, it does work. And also when you see that little video we showed, and it shows the picture of, you know, it can make your face saggy if you don't have enough sleep and you get the line.
Yeah. I mean, that was enough to make me actually start working on my sleep when I learned that one.
Yeah, and the power napping. Okay, so again, health, and we know that it's really important to get a good night's sleep, because that is when all of our cells can start to renew themselves. We're restoring everything in the body, and we're also doing that recalibration of our emotional brain circuits, which is so important to do. And again, when we were talking about that uncluttering, because that's when that's happening as well. And we know that if we haven't got enough sleep, our emotion, we're so much more sensitive to situations. We find that our coping mechanisms aren't quite as good as well.
You've got that less resilience to cope with any kind of frustration, don't you? And it's, you know, you feel worse, you're snappier, and you just can't cope with that one little thing extra that someone gives you. Yeah. And it fine-tunes a lot of the hormones in the body, such as insulin, glucose and other chemicals. And they did this a study recently, I think it was 2022, on a group of firefighters. Not sure why they chose firefighters, but they were testing their cognitive ability and also their hormone levels before and after sleep. And what they found, again, they stopped some of them sleeping and allowed another set of them to sleep. And the ones who had not slept, their levels of cognitive ability was down, but also their testosterone levels were down. So just bear those kind of things in mind as well. Human growth hormone, I mean, that's a really interesting one, isn't it, Teresa? Oh, it is. You know, one of the reasons we think that babies need so much sleep is because during the night we produce more human growth hormone than we do at any time during the day, and therefore, and that is where the babies are doing their growth, and also they need to repair and restore and learn so much. So is that the reason why, or one of the reasons, the many reasons why they need much more sleep than you do as when you become an adult? Which is quite interesting, isn't it? It is, yeah. And I think that whole impact on your physical health is quite interesting and really kind of brings home the importance of getting that sleep. Yeah, so should we talk about the consequences of poor sleep then? Yep. Okay, so I mean, there is, as we've already said, there's some really huge consequences, but these are some of the major disasters. I mean, 1986 obviously was not a good year. I didn't realise until I was putting this down. So, you know, if we talk about Chernobyl for starters, and Chernobyl, the engineers have been working 13 hours, and the catastrophe started around 1:40 in the morning, when the work was probably getting that real dip. You know, when you're doing nights and things like that, you get a dip at around between 1 and 3, you get a real dip, and they're probably feeling very drowsy and not reacting very well, and that's why, you know, Chernobyl happened. The Challenger, we know about that. That was
when the Challenger spaceship took off, and I think it's just 70 seconds after takeoff that it exploded. And again, that was due to managers and staff being overworked and unable to react and make the right decisions at the time. And finally, the Selby rail crash in 2001, and that was due to a man who fell asleep in his Land Rover. And I think he came down an embankment and he actually landed on the railway track, which then caused two trains to actually collide with each other as well.
I think we don't often think about those really significant impacts that sleep can have, do we? Even though we see the adverts around, you know, if you're driving, take a break. So it can have such a big impact on us being able to function.
Yeah, and one of the things, you know, we were talking earlier around, you know, if you're driving and you're starting to feel tired and they say open a window, if you're getting to the stage where you're thinking, I need to open a window, and if you're on motorways and you've been driving for quite a long time and it's warm, turning up the radio, that's not good enough. That is the time you need to be pulling over and actually having that power nap. A coffee isn't only going to be a tiny little bit of a booster, but that's when you need to have that power nap that will just give you that battery recharging to get you on your way again. And I think, is it lorry drivers, they have like a clock that tracks them?
A tachograph. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so they have to take breaks.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Good idea. Maybe that should be something in any long distance driving.
Yeah, definitely.
So poor sleep and children and adults. So we've touched about it already. So it has a huge effect on cognitive ability, emotional behavioural difficulties, and academic performance. If you look at the academic performance of children who are sleeping well against those who have got poor sleep over a period of time, you can see the levels very differently. And if they then start to pick up, their sleep improves, you can actually see the academic levels start to change and improve as well at the same time. So it has a huge impact as well.
Yeah.
Concentration and focus, learning and memory. And again, you know, if you've got ratty children who are overtired, it has a huge impact on friendship and relationships.
Yeah, they're just not able to get on with other people, are they? And that makes a huge difference. Like, get into arguments, they're a bit more difficult. And I often think about when you see sort of around that 18 months to 2 years stage, when you've seen the child that's really kind of distressed and it's really upset, and often you hear the parents say, oh, I'm so sorry, they haven't had their nap today. And that impact, and it's the same at whatever stage, really, is that if you're not getting that level of sleep, actually that is the same reaction that we're having. Yeah, and unfortunately, if the children aren't sleeping, it usually means the parents aren't sleeping as well. And of course, the consequences of that are, you know, for the parents themselves, it can create a huge impact on the whole household, how the household is functioning, family conflict, and even marital breakdowns as well. Parenting is really tricky when you're overtired. Yep. When you've got a tired I can't speak now. Tired child. Yes, thank you. And tired adults as well. Yep. That can cause really difficult sort of relationships. And it becomes very fractious in the house, doesn't it? But also the ultimate thing is around, not only is it, you know, having those impacts on your ability to function in the daytime, but also that emotional well-being, where you're stressed and you get depressed and your anxiety increases, and then we're more prone to having those accidents as well. Yeah. And that goes back to driving, and you know, we were talking about driving earlier, and people who drive in the early hours of the morning, there's more accidents at, you know, after 7 o'clock at night until I think it's 3 o'clock in the morning, because people are more tired as well. Consequences of poor sleep. So we've touched on a lot of these. There's been a huge amounts of research around the impacts on fitness, and both Therese and I, who like our fitness, are quite into this bit as well. So one of the pieces of research that was done recently looked at NBA players and found athletes who were tweeting between midnight and 8 o'clock in the morning had a much worse performance, and they were scoring fewer points. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about electronic devices later on and how that does have an impact as well.
And the other thing that's really quite interesting is that when we lose the hour, when the clocks change, there's an increase of A&E admissions for cardiac arrests and heart attacks by around 4 to 29% for the following week, which is quite interesting. That's when we lose the hour. We don't see, what's really interesting when you think about it, you think, oh, so when we gain an hour, does that actually reduce? And there's not very conclusive evidence to say that actually things improve when we gain an hour, unfortunately. But there is significant difference when we do lose the hour.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us can feel that, can't we? Because I know if you've got very small children, they don't tell the time, so they don't know the time. And if they're used to getting up at a certain time, they're up. And I know that my cat and my dog definitely don't know how to tell the time. And if the clocks have gone, it just does me in because they're just up at the normal time.
Yeah. And we said before, the short sleep duration is linked to raising blood pressure, heart disease and stroke. And it also, if you've got prolonged, we know that if you've got prolonged lack of sleep, you actually have your increased, your immune system is much lower, and then you've got an increased risk of viral infections. And there's a lot of research at the moment that's coming out around a higher increased risk of dementia and Alzheimer's as well.
Yeah.
That's starting to emerge. I think that was around, there's been a recent study in 2022 as well. Okay, so yeah, the World Health Organization has declared that there is a sleep loss epidemic, and we would say, yes, there definitely is. And we shouldn't have put in the hours here because we're going to ask that in a minute. And so routinely sleeping less than 6 or 7 hours a night can affect your immune system, disrupt blood sugar levels. And there's also this link to obesity as well.
Yeah. And I think that's been quite new. That's been coming out over the last few years of recognizing that that very poor sleep is linked to weight gain and weight increase and obesity, and an inability to actually lose that weight as well.
Yeah, and they think there's too little sleep increases concentrations of the hormone that promotes that needing of hunger and eating, and actually suppressing the hormone which actually can regulate that as well. And that's one of the reasons behind it. So there's, therefore it's saying,
I think often if you're tired, I know if I haven't slept properly, not only do people crave that kind of caffeine because they're kind of getting stuck into that cycle then of kind of looking at how you keep awake when you're actually really tired. But the next thing that you actually take rather than caffeine is those sugar fixes, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's not great for you either.
No, that's true. That's true. And I think, again, going back to that little video that we saw, if you start to make wrong choices,
yeah,
you haven't got that sleep, you're not concentrating, your focus isn't good, and you make wrong choices. You might go, oh, actually I prefer the cake, even though I probably should have that, but you just have that because that's quicker and I'm a bit tired.
Yeah, and you do see it, don't you, even in workplaces where people just go, oh, it's 3 o'clock, I really need some chocolate, and they go and get some.
Oh yes, and that was quite interesting actually, because we didn't realize that both of us don't have caffeine, do we?
No, neither of us do. So that was part of my sorting my sleep out. I actually have no caffeine at all in my diet, including chocolate.
Yeah, I have to bow down to you on that one, because I do like my chocolate. I do like my chocolates, but I don't have any caffeine at all in anything. We're one of those awkward customers that goes into the coffee shop and they say, right, what would you like? Would you like a latte? I don't even know what half of these are because I don't drink it. Can I have a juice or chamomile tea, please? And everyone looks at me as though I'm an alien that's just walked into the coffee shop. It's called a coffee shop. You have coffee? I don't have the coffee, but I will have the cake. So yes, thank you, Sophie, because I know we're waffling.
What is the optimal sleep requirement for an adult? What do you think?
It's an interesting one, because most people got this right in the last two. So I'm hoping, for this group, this is a bedtime group, hoping good things are going to get really good scoring here. I'm pretty sure most people should know this.
I'm sure they will.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting how different it is. And we'll talk a bit about teenagers in a minute as well, how different it is for teenagers as well. And you were saying that you're for,
Oh, this one's, they're very clever, this group.
oh, very, very intelligent group. Yeah, they're on it. That's great. They've obviously had their tea. And they might have had their power nap, so they, you know, they've remembered, they know these things. That's great. That's really good. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so these are some research findings on sleep requirements, and wherever you look, it's slightly different. So we've got a couple of major people and researchers in sort of sleep, this sleep arena. So the National Sleep Foundation had one set. The AASM, which is the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, they did a consensus piece of research, I think it was 2016, where they looked at hundreds of different papers and what people were saying and pieces of research, and these are the recommendations that they came out with. And then we've got the Canadian research as well. And as you can see, they're all pretty similar, saying the similar things. But what also you can see is that the difference from the newborn and to the adults as well, and the older adults, where it appears that we need to have less sleep. Now, there's a little bit of a conversation about that, because do older adults actually need less sleep? But actually, if you look at a lot of the older adults, they're napping throughout the day, so they're actually are probably having more sleep than the 7 to 8 hours that it says in the National Sleep Foundation. And I think that that's sort of a conversation when we're looking at the 24-hour clock and how much you're requiring over that period of time, what is enough, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I know with my mum, she'll actually drop off while you're talking to her if it's mid-afternoon.
Yes. Yes, I've got a family that do that as well. And so this is just a really nice picture. No, I mean, the grass really nice. The picture's really nice as well. And this is just another way of demonstrating the sleep requirement as well. And that's from the US National Sleep. Okay, so we want you to actually engage with us a little bit more, and also just to prove that we're not recorded, we're just going to do a little bit of a poll. So we want you to put into the chat, name a song with sleep in the title or about sleep. Now, we had some really good ones in the last session. So again, there's a lot of you in here today, so we want to get some really good ones out there. You'll have to shout them out, Teresa. I can't see the chat.
I haven't got in yet. Rockabye Baby, I'll Sleep When I'm Dead.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, that's a good one.
I'll Get No Sleep, Insomnia. Sleep When I'm Dead. Enter the Sandman.
Oh, I love that one.
Sing Me to Sleep.
Yeah, good.
I Go to Sleep. Daydream Believer.
Oh yes, hadn't thought of that.
Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. We didn't have that one last time.
Oh, do you know what? We should have used that. Should be a really good one for our anchoring when we're talking about anchoring later. I'll remember that. Yeah. Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. That's a good one. Yeah.
I've got loads now.
Oh, has anyone put The Lion Sleeps Tonight? Because that's my favourite.
Yeah, I've had a few of those.
Good old tight fit. No Sleep to Brooklyn.
No, I haven't seen that one. Sweet Dreams, the Eurythmics.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, brilliant.
What I always remember from when I was young was You've Been Talking in Your Sleep.
Oh yes, yes.
She had amazingly long hair. I can't remember her name, but I just remember that she had like hair down to the floor.
Oh, oh, well done. I think we've got some really good ones there. That's Definitely. Our homework for tonight. So you can carry on that. Shall we go into a bit more of sort of like the boring bit? Oh, I think this is really interesting. For me, this is the best bit, because this makes us understand what sleep is and all about it. Yeah. This is the sleep science, isn't it?
And I think it's really helpful. I know it was really helpful for me when I was sorting my sleep out, to kind of really understand what is going on. And it does then it makes more sense to you why you're doing it.
So basically, we've got a 24-hour body clock. And again, if we think about that, over this 24 hours, we spend some of that time we're wide awake and some of that time we're asleep. And obviously that's a little bit different if you're doing shift work and things like that. But normally that is what we're doing. And that's driven, our body clock is driven by a couple of things. It's driven by light and dark, day and night, and it's also driven by our routines,
Exactly.
which is our circadian rhythm. And it's really interesting because again, they've done lots of studying. There's probably all these medical students, and they've locked them in dark rooms and deprived them of light, but they've kept them having their same routines, which is the circadian rhythm. So they've fed them at the same time, said you've got to go to bed at the same time, and they can maintain that. And it's really interesting when they're deprived of day and night, how their body clocks might actually change, but that 24 hours cycle seems to continue to happen. And I think one study that came out, it was like 24.35 hours, the actual, that's circadian.
And I think they've done some as well where you've got at certain points in the world, don't you, where you get no nighttime, and then there's other points where you get no daytime in the year as well, and the impact on people and how they have to manage that.
Yes, and one of the things we will talk a bit about is how that environment, so for instance, how important day and night are, and if you're in that kind of environment, whether you need to have like blackout blinds or I was going to say iPads over your eyes and things like that, so you can actually have that darkness, and then when you wake up you need to have that lightness to actually make you awake. Should we talk a bit more about circadian rhythms?
Yes,
we do like those, don't we?
We do. So circadian rhythms, and I think most people have heard about or heard that word at least, and it's our internal body clock, so it takes its cue from light and dark. So naturally we want to be awake when it's light, and we naturally want to go to sleep when it's dark, and that's why often people feel much more awake and more alive in the summertime. And I know for me, I've always felt like I should be hibernating in the winter when it's dark all the time. And we strengthen it by our routines and our behaviours, such as eating at set times. So, actually getting up and then having a breakfast, and then getting that sense of being hungry later on in the day. And they're all points where we can just set those routines that actually set us up for the rest of that day. And all of them are little cues towards that later part of the day where we want to go to sleep. And we know, sorry, Ruth, I know you was going to say something then.
No, go. You're going to do shift work.
Yeah. Yeah, and we know that they're affected by shift work and traveling to places with big time zone differences. People always talk about jet lag if they've gone from one time zone to another. But it's been quite a lot of research as well into shift work, and particularly the impact on shift workers if they're constantly not getting the same sleep, or their cycle is reversed, because it's now known and recognised that employers have a kind of responsibility to those workers to make sure that their health is being maintained, because of the impact it can have.
And it also changes if we think about how our circadian rhythm is set by those routines. So if we're doing shift work, so we're doing nights, and both of us have done nights as nurses, and then you're going back into days, it's really hard to work out when you should be eating, because you're not hungry at certain times, and you're hungry at weird times, like in 2 o'clock in the morning, all of a sudden you're feeling hungry because that's what you were doing when you were on nights, and things like that, and getting those routines back into place. And this is when we'll talk a little bit more around setting that bedtime routine, why it's so important, because that actually is structuring your 24-hour circadian rhythms by reinforcing those behaviors every time you're doing those. And we know, for instance, at lunchtime when we were doing the last one, my tummy was starting to rumble, and that's because I have my lunch at pretty much the same time every day. And if I don't eat, my tummy starts to rumble. So just before I'm due to eat, my tummy my hormones are starting to produce ghrelin, which is making me feel hungry. I go and eat, the ghrelin levels go down. And then the same thing happens, later on in the evening when I'm a bit hungry and ready for my dinner. So it's really clever, isn't it?
It is.
Let's talk about sleep pressure, shall we? Now,
definitely.
Hopefully this will work. So this is lovely Matt, and you can listen to the whole of this sleep pressure podcast, and the QR code's there, but it's a nice little one. I'm hoping this is going to work. Can you hear Matt?
Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to the podcast. 2 questions to start with. Why will you get tired this evening? And why, tomorrow morning when you wake up, will you be free from that tiredness? Well, it turns out that there are two independent but very complementary forces that explain exactly why this is the case. The first of those is called sleep pressure, and the second is called your circadian rhythm. Today, we're going to focus on the first of those two things. We're going to focus on sleep pressure, because from the moment that you woke up this morning, a chemical has been building up in your brain. And the longer that you're awake, the more of that chemical will continue to build up. And the more of that chemical that builds up, the sleepier you will feel. This is what we call sleep pressure. And that chemical is called adenosine. And you can think of adenosine almost like a chemical barometer that continually registers the amount of elapsed time since you woke up this morning. So it's a chemical signal that helps tell your brain and your body how long that you've been awake. And when those levels get high enough, it will tell your brain it's time to go to bed because you're sleepy. Now, adenosine accomplishes this sleepiness using a very clever dual action effect. High levels of adenosine in the evening will simultaneously turn down the volume in wake-promoting regions of your brain, and it will crank up the dial on sleep-inducing regions of the brain. And at that point, with adenosine concentrations peaking, there should be an irresistible urge for slumber that will take hold of you. And it happens to most of us somewhere after about 12 to 16 hours of being awake. You can, however, artificially mute the sleep signal of adenosine by using another chemical that makes you feel more alert and more awake. You know this chemical, it's called caffeine. It's no coincidence, by the way, that those two things sound quite similar, caffeine and adenosine. It's down to the systems in the brain that they both act upon. Now,
okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Matt. So let's go back to the
definitely worth having a real listen to that one, or getting that book as well, because that came out and I think that was quite revolutionary with his book, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I love the way he speaks, actually.
Yeah, it's really calming.
It's very calming. If I couldn't sleep at night, I could quite happily just listen to him in the background. And
yeah, David Attenborough has that effect on me as well.
Oh, okay. Oh, and books. We know about books. Books are very good for you, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
So this is putting it all together. So we've got the sleep-wake homeostasis. So that sleep pressure is driven from the moment you wake up. That's starting to build up throughout the day. So as you get closer to sort of sleep time, like we are now, you're probably feeling more of the urge to go to bed and go to sleep. And that's building up that sleep desire throughout the day. And then, of course, on top of that, we've got the circadian rhythm, which is governed or supported by night and dark, and also our behavioural activities that are influencing. So that's the routines that we're talking about. And then we've got, what do we love? We really love this bit, don't you?
Okay, the hormones.
The hormones.
Our melatonin and our cortisol.
Go on. This is
melatonin is our sleepy hormone. So we've got the adenosine that builds up through the day. And when Matt was talking about those parts of the brain that are switching on and off, the melatonin is one of the things that it switches on. So it's our sleep hormone, and it's the onset, and it's transient. So it only stays in the body from a limited time, and it's very sensitive to light. So we know that if you want to go to sleep and you're on electronics, or you're watching really bright screens and you're on your phone, the melatonin, because it's a transient chemical, is only going to be there for a short time. And if you've got the light on, it's not going to be produced, because your brain will register it as daylight and it will not produce that. So it's really important that we understand that about melatonin and how that actually helps us to sleep. And then the other side of that is the cortisol, which is the other thing that helps us to be the wake up, and that's our wake up hormone. And the cortisol is produced in times of stress, so fight and flight, and it's the opposite hormone. So it's the bit that actually at night we're wanting the adenosine to shut down, but in the morning we want it to actually be switched back on again. and it's needed to regulate the circadian rhythm for the day. And high levels of cortisol at times of stress inhibit the release of melatonin, so thus making it really difficult to sleep. So you can imagine then how that sleep cycle and that inability to sleep starts to build up. So if you start to think about what you've learned already about that importance of our sleep routine, but if you're not getting to sleep, actually you're not having that melatonin, you're not getting relaxed, you're feeling far more stressed. So actually you're waking up with much higher levels of cortisol, which then begin to build because you're struggling, you're really getting agitated in the daytime, your body's producing more of that cortisol, and the more that it produces, the worse we feel. And you can just see how that sleep cycle starts to fall apart, and then you're not able to sleep.
It's like the yin and yang, I always say. It's, you know, you've got your melatonin and your cortisol, and they don't really like to go together. And it's again, it's quite interesting. Is the melatonin is built up, you know, during with the adenosine as well, and then the cortisol kicks in the mornings, and that wakes you up. And we'll talk a little bit more about sleep cycles in a minute. But yeah, that wake up hormone, it's just, yeah, it's great. We do need it, and we need it to be alert. And when we've got the fight or flight mechanism, when we need to be sort of making quick decisions and things like that, it's there with adrenaline, and it's making us, you know, we really need it during the day, and it makes us really focus. But what we really don't want it is at night time, and that's when we want the melatonin to come in and to make us feel nice and sleepy. During sleep, so this is sleep cycles. So we go through lots of different cycles. So this is called sleep architecture. And so we've got the two main types of sleep. We've got REM, which is rapid eye movement, and that's when our dreams are occur. And this is the vital bit where we do a lot of mental and emotional development as well. It's really interesting. We were talking about this earlier about, you know, what is the reason? Why do we have dreams? You know, sometimes we remember them, sometimes we don't. What is the reason behind dreams? What are dreams? I mean, there's
no one's really worked it out, have they?
No, it's really strange. Some people, I've got a friend of mine, and he records every time he wakes up, he records his dreams. I've got other friends who say they've never dreamt, they don't dream. We all do dream. You might not remember them, but we all do dream. You go through that cycle. But we don't know what the reasons, and we know that you can watch your cats and your dogs, your pets, they actually dream. You can see their eyes flickering. They're dreaming. I'd love to know what they're dreaming about. And then we've got non-REM, and that's a different stage of sleep, and that's where the really deep sleep occurs, and that's when we're doing a lot of that body repairing as well, because we're quite still there. We're still in both of them. We have to be still in REM sleep, not dream sleep, because otherwise we'd start acting out our dreams, by the way. But in non-REM, that's when we've got that really rich and really important piece of sleep, and that tends to happen at the beginning of your sleep. So if you take your 8 hours, the first 4 hours, that's when you're going to get those really nice deep drops of really nice deep sleep. And then as we wake up, we have a much lighter sleep. And I'm going to show you and explain a little bit more. So this is what's called a hypnogram, and this is basically a graph that represents the stages of sleep in a sort of a time scale. So if we think about that 24-hour clock, this is the 8-hour period that we were talking about, and most of you got that right in sort of saying how much sleep we need. So this is an average sort of sleep, and we've got two anchor points. We've got the point where we go to sleep, which is called the sort of like the first anchor point, and then we've got the one that we wake up, and that is anchoring our 24-hour circadian rhythm. And by putting in a good bedtime routine that you're doing the same, you start to anchor those 2 points, and waking up at the same time in the morning, you start to anchor the morning point as well, and that will keep your circadian rhythm in the same position. If you start to change it, so if you have lie-ins, for example, that shifts that circadian rhythms. If you change your bedtime routine, or you start to go to bed later, and we've all done it, you know, it gets a bit later and a bit later because you're just going to watch one more thing, or you're just tidying up a little bit more.
Those box sets.
I've just got to watch one more. and you find yourself that whole circadian rhythm can start to shift slightly. And then if we look at the actual cycles itself, and as we were saying, you've got those really nice deep sleeps there. And then the REM sleep, where you've got the red bits, they're the rapid eye movements, that's where you're doing the dreaming. And as you can see, if you think about what we've already talked about, those two hormones, those melatonin and cortisol. So we've got melatonin peaking at the first 3 or 4 hours, and that's when we're doing that nice deep sleep. And what we find is there's a crossover when cortisol starts to come in, melatonin gets less, and we've got much lighter sleep and more dream sleep in the second half of our night. And so the early hours of the morning, we've got a much lighter sleep when the cortisol levels are higher, but the melatonin is starting to go down. And then eventually we wake up, and then we start the whole cycle again. So that pressure starts to build up. The cortisol levels are really high and the melatonin levels are really low. I think we need to have a look at your sleep, actually.
Have a look at my one. So if anyone's got an Apple Watch, you can actually set this up. So I think you weren't aware of it, were you, Ruth? Because I was aware of some time ago when they first started having Fitbits about sleep, and thinking, oh, my sleep's not great. I need to do something about my sleep. And actually, they've got the wearables have got much more technology on them now. Yeah. So you can actually see that graph in action where you start going down into sleep, the deep sleep going up. And you might see those little orange bits right at the top where you're awake for a short period. We all do that, even on that last graph, those peaks up. Everybody naturally has small wakes during their sleep cycles. And most of the time we don't remember them. Obviously with mine, you'll see that one towards the morning, that's the cat and the dog, particularly at the moment where it's actually pretty light at 4:30 in the morning. My dog is wanting to go out sort of quite early on. And if it's a weekend day, I normally go back to sleep and I might get that another kind of hour and a half or so. On a work day, it kind of disrupts my sleep slightly. And someone on the last group asked me why I was in bed for 7 hours and 47 minutes, yeah. But slept for 6 hours and 2 minutes. And that will be partly because one of the things that I worked out for my routine is if anyone's heard of like Pavlov's dogs, and about setting up those key triggers and those anchor points that Ruth was just on about. So mine is actually laying down in bed, so there's no electronics, the room is quite dark, but reading for a short amount of time. And actually that's become a real key point, and I didn't realize until I was on holiday how important that was, and how much my brain is now associates lying down and reading with going to sleep, until I was on the beach and I was reading, and the next thing I know my other half was poking me in the side going, you've gone to sleep, because normally if I'm reading I'd be sitting up in the daytime, but actually because I was lying on the beach, I was lying down, and so actually my brain had gone into that mode where actually if she's lying down and reading, she must be about to go to sleep. Just dropped off like that. So it's one of my really important parts of my sleep routine, but also kind of really seeing that deep sleep and that change as you go through the night into that lighter sleep as well.
And it's really important with staying around, having those routines and the bedtime routine and those anchor points, and doing the same thing every night, like as you say, conditioning theory, which is the Pavlov's dogs. And I think the other thing is to remember at these sleep wake points, if a young child does this, wakes up at those points, and we respond naturally and go in and do something or give them something, that's actually reinforcing the behavior to continue on. And it only takes 3 nights. So, okay, Teresa, we're going to do it now. You know what I'm going to say?
I do.
It's 2 o'clock. It's 2 o'clock in the morning.
I know.
What would you like to drink? What's your choice? What's your poison?
I'm gonna have a mango and pineapple smoothie.
Wow. Okay, that's certainly going to wake you
and
up.
At 2 o'clock in the morning, I want a lot of sugar.
You want some sugar? Okay. So would you like a donut with that?
Yep, I'll have a donut with that.
Donut, any type of donut, or just a normal donut?
Just a normal donut.
Just a normal donut. I could get you a fairground donut. That'd be really nice. A warm, really greasy one. Okay, so I've knocked on your door. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. First night, you're not going to be too impressed with me, to be honest. I'm sure your partner will be even less impressed with me.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you your drink and your donuts, and you're going to eat it for me, and you're going to drink it. So that's great. So you've done that the first night. Second night, I'm going to do it, and you're going to go, oh yeah, okay, that's all right. By the third night, you're probably going to wake up just before I get there. And not only are you going to wake up, your hormones would have changed and would have adjusted. And not only will you have woken up, you might be even thirsty, craving some sugar. And I've rewarded the behavior. And the next night when I don't turn up, you'll probably be Snapchatting me or something, going, where's my donuts?
Yeah.
Where are you?
Exactly.
We know it only takes 3 nights to actually put in a routine like this and change that whole body, that whole circadian rhythm, that whole sleep structure can change. So one of those wake up points, you're rewarding that behavior and it continues on. So the way to change it, you're going to be asking, okay, right, fine, I've got that. Okay, how do I change it? That's the tricky thing, is because the only way you can change it is by actually not doing it.
And I think also that for a lot of parents, I think that bit where it is sort of 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning is the bit where often the kid gets into the bed with you, and then we're setting up a whole nother habit around sleep association and the feel, and it can be, you know, just as bad as that drink and that donut at that time of the morning as well.
Yeah, it's really tricky, isn't it? And we know that it takes, say, 3 or 4 nights to actually put in a new routine or a new habit, but it can take anything up to 15 attempts
or
to
more
actually retrain, or more to change
and
it.
that 15 would need to be absolutely consistently doing it repeatedly and religiously, day in day, you know, each day. And as I was saying to the earlier group, one of my children obviously inherited it from me, had really poor sleep, and I can remember trying to cure that sleep problem where he was the only one. I've got quite a few children that would constantly be up through the night, and then really just kind of setting aside that time and thinking, right, we've got to deal with this. And it was like having a boomerang that was just kind of in and out of bed, and every time he got up, putting him back, every time he got up, putting him back, and eventually we cracked it, and he does sleep well now.
Oh, amazing. How old is he now?
He's about 38 now.
Oh, that's so pleased.
But he was about 8 at that time, and I think I'd had about 8 years of no sleep at that point. You know, and you know, we just kind of, because my other children slept, so it was, you know, what's going on with this one. Yeah, it was a bit of a shock because he was up and down all the time.
So adolescents, and we know adolescents, they do require a lot of sleep, but they tend to reduce their amount of sleep, don't they, in adolescents?
And also their rhythm changes at this point as well. And there was a really interesting program that I saw where they were looking at teenagers and their sleep, and their circadian rhythm kind of changes slightly. So we know that teenagers are grumpier, they like longer lay-ins, but actually what they looked at was that they naturally want to go to sleep slightly later, but they also want to stay in bed longer when it comes to the morning as well. And they were kind of saying that if we could change our education system so that school started around 11, a lot more of them probably do a lot better during the day, but obviously that isn't going to happen. But at the same time, they tend to be much more sociable at that age. They tend to be much more out of our reach. So they're going out with their friends, they're doing stuff, and now they're online as well.
Should we talk about electronics?
Yes. I think
the
wonders and the terrors of it.
Yeah, and I think it's really difficult, isn't it? Because I think there's a real pull, and we all do this, don't we? And one of the things that we've also sort of pointed out and we were discussing earlier is the fact that as parents, we're modelling how children are interacting and using modern technology. So if we're sitting there in, you know, conversations and picking up our phone or answering it or doing a quick text or checking the news, or we go to bed and the last thing we're doing is checking on Facebook or sending a text or checking our emails, we're modelling that behaviour to our children, and then we might be expecting them not to be doing it. So we need to model like that really good behavior, because we know that the electronics has that direct influence. It's like, as you know, we were saying earlier, Teresa was saying, it sends that light message straight into the brain that is switching off the melatonin levels.
Yeah,
Or
and I
really
think for
design.
really, yeah, sorry, Ruth. I was going to say, really importantly, a big question that people often have is around medication for sleep and melatonin in particular. And it doesn't matter if you're on electronics, even if you take something for sleep, you aren't going to sleep, because the light going into your brain is telling your brain it doesn't need to have melatonin or produce melatonin because it's daytime. And that is the problem with it. And I think, I don't know if you saw that story yesterday, there was an amazing story on the news yesterday, and it was America, where the bus driver had some sort of medical emergency whilst driving the school bus. And one of the children on the bus, his parents don't allow him to have electronics, and he was the only one on the bus that noticed that the driver was actually veering off the road, and he jumped up, went to the front and saved everyone, because everybody else was on their phone and on their electronics. They hadn't even noticed that the bus was swerving, and I just thought, wow, that's such a powerful message.
It is, isn't it? And I think we know, we can see it more and more these days. You know, everyone, if they're sitting and standing and waiting in the queue, sitting and waiting on a bus, you know, heads down, and they're on the phone. It's how people are interacting these days. And I think we've got to be mindful of the fact that there is a pressure for youngsters especially to have that, be in the loop and keeping conversations, and that's how they're building friendships and making connections, and they can make connections with all over the world, which is an amazing thing to be able to do. But on the other side of that, how is that actually having an influence and affecting socialization in reality, but also, you know, how is that affecting and impacting on our sleep as well? And I suppose the other thing is, we also know that now you're handing in a lot of your homework is handed in online. You know, you're typing it rather than we used to do it on paper, with paper and pens. That seems so old-fashioned now, doesn't it?
Oh, I know. I know, just even the uni courses that I do, you know, everything is submitted online.
Yeah, so it's quite different. So it is really hard when we're saying, you know, actually, can we reduce the amount of electronics that are used? But actually, we realise that it's quite a tricky thing to do. It's not as easy as
and I think there's a balance, isn't there, around kind of finding something that's kind of equally as nice to do. But you know, I know that if I've got a deadline approaching and I'm kind of on the laptop and I'm getting work done, and it gets to my normal time where I'd be going to bed, because my phone would tell me, my watch would tell me it's coming up for bedtime, I'm still going to actually have to do my routine to actually come down from all of that electronic stuff and just get staring at a screen before I'd be able to go to bed.
Yeah, and it's what's really interesting. I mean, this is just another study. We like to throw in our studies here, and just, you know, 55% of teens surf the web, 56 send or receive text most nights before bed. That's one study, and this is a really interesting one. 67% of teens got between 2 and 4 hours less sleep due to checking on their phones as well, which is quite incredible, isn't it? Yeah. And the other thing is, and we'll leave you to go and Google this later on, but actually there is now a diagnosis under the ICD-10 of phone addiction. Yeah, there's a certain criteria you have to reach, but you can actually be given a diagnosis of phone addiction. I'm not quite sure if I'm quite there yet.
And I've had 2 young people that I've worked with. One was kind of staying up all night on, you know, doing the online gaming and things, and parents were getting really cross about the fact that he was up all night. And then we had a whole chat and we were talking about all of this. And the next time I saw him, he said, I did my own research and you were right. And I said, yeah, I know I was. And he said, and I worked out, he said, because I wanted to know exactly how much sleep should I be getting. So he said, I've now changed my bedtime because I'm meant to get 9 to 10 hours. So I've changed my bedtime now. So I'm going to bed at 10:30 because that's the right time for me. And I'm now getting up at this time. And I was just like totally amazed. But it actually, I think that's another thing that we can do, is start informing our young people as well about their choices in this as well. And I was explaining earlier to an earlier group about, I don't know if anyone on this has got a young person that's kind of almost completely reversed their sleep-wake cycle. So they're up kind of in the night, they're not getting to school because they're asleep in the day, their mood is down, it can have a real impact on their health as well. And I had a young person doing that. And we had to shift their sleep pattern. And once you've got into that kind of phase, you really do need some support around how you start to get that back. So what we had to do was plan how we would start to bring that wake up time, because they were sleeping through the day, not getting up to about 6, 7 in the evening, and then being awake all night. And their health was really getting quite bad at that point. And so we started to take that time back each time, giving it a little bit of time, then going back again. And we had a couple of false starts, but then we really got down to it. We did it. And actually, they've now completely reversed it back the other way. And what I think I was, as much as I know this stuff, what I found unbelievable was the significant difference in their physical health and how much healthier they looked and felt when they'd actually got the cycle back to where it should be.
And it's quite interesting talking about the cycles, isn't it, and bedtime routines. And if you're going to change anything, it's rather than trying to do big changes. So if you said, for instance, I mean, I know a lot of the questions that we had around as a child that they're put into bed, but actually going to sleep until 10 o'clock. Now, if I was looking at and doing a sleep assessment on that, I'd be saying, right, okay, you're putting them to bed at 8 o'clock, but they're not sleeping until 10 o'clock. That means their melatonin is starting to be produced around 9 o'clock. Therefore, what we need to do is go in sync with what they're doing, what their body clock is telling them at the moment, and then start to work backwards. Because it'd be like putting me going to bed at 6 o'clock at night and be like, I'm not going to sleep, I'm just going to lie there. That's going to create that anxiety within the bed, and I'm going to get used to being in the bed and lying and feeling anxious, and that creates that sleep association, the poor sleep association with the bed, where I want it to be a place where I feel relaxed and calm. So again, it's trying to sort of understand where we're at now, if we want to change it. And if you're looking at doing that, so say if the young child is falling asleep at 10 o'clock, you then start, okay, right, this is where you're going to go to bed. You're going to start the bedtime routine about 45 minutes beforehand, do the same routine every night. And then also you need to anchor that morning time, so waking them up at the same time every day, even though they're not going to like that, because you need to reset that body clock. And then what you can do is you slowly change it and move it 15 minutes every 3 days. So it gets 15 minutes earlier and earlier until you've reset it into the time zone you want. Anyway, we've gone back, we're just motoring on, talking along the way. I'm just going to talk very quickly about a study that they did at Leeds Beckett University around mobile phone usage. And they'd studied, it was 594 students aged between the ages of 11 and 18. And they found that most of them would check their phone during family meals, leave it on the side, and whilst doing homework and during school lessons. That's where schools allow the phones in the lessons. And a total of 96 said they checked their phone nearly every 2 minutes, and while 85% spend around between 4 to 6 hours a day online or on their phones. I mean, that's just one study of quite a few children.
And I think it just depends, doesn't it, on the individual. So, I know that I think my children, one of the things I've often had from them is, why do you even have a phone? Because I actually forget to check mine. But I grew up in an age where we didn't have them. But I think for them it's, and as we've seen, a lot of it's around their communication with others as well.
So monitoring sleep. So we've sort of in not any order at all. So polysomnography, that's a lovely word. I love that word. It kind of flows, doesn't it, when you say it? So that's where you're getting the full work. So if you went into a sleep clinic, they would do a polysomnography assessment. And that's where you'll have all of the probes on your head and measuring all your brain waves. They'll be measuring your breathing. They'll be measuring your temperature, your blood pressure, and your pulse rate. They'll be measuring your eye movements as well, but they also measure your body movements, because again, with the way your body's working and moving around in the night can tell us a huge amount. And they put all of that together, and that'll give them really good information. And this is for those who are really having problems with sleep problems and diagnosis of insomnia and bits and pieces like that. And it's really interesting to go and see. I've been to a sleep clinic up in East Grinstead and watched how they do that, and watching it overnight and seeing how, you know, the difference changes. The only thing which I find is quite interesting when you're looking at this, it's a very false environment, and one of the things we're talking about is how do you make the environment very friendly.
Yeah.
And actually going into a sleep clinic to be observed sleeping, I think might be quite tricky anyway.
The majority of them are in London though, aren't they, these sleep clinics?
Yeah. And we've talked a bit about sleep apps and wearables, and the other thing is sleep diaries. Now, this is a really old-fashioned way, and this is my health visiting hat going back on, and also as a sleep practitioner, having a sleep diary is really, really useful. And just writing down times, especially if you're the observer rather than trying to do it on your own sleep, because obviously you're asleep. But if you can observe, if it's your child's sleep and you're looking and you're worried about it, is writing down what were they doing before they went to sleep, what was that bedtime routine like, what time did they actually go to bed, what time did they actually fall asleep, what time did they wake up in the night, what happened, what did you do, what did they do, and then in the morning what time did they wake up, what kind of mood they were in, and putting all of that information together. And then you can start to look at some of those themes that are coming through and see if there's any trends that are there. I was like, okay, well actually this is happening every night. I mean, for instance, when we were talking about things that might wake you up in the middle of the night, you know, does the heating come on? Is that when they're waking up? And or is it when someone's going off to work in the morning, or the next door neighbour's dog wakes up, and things like that? You might be able to see those patterns and start to think about how you can make changes to actually help them. So shall we talk about getting the best night's sleep?
Yep, I think that would be what everybody wants to know. And
I was going to say, Teresa, it's nearly bedtime.
I know. And I must say my cat is kind of getting ready for his. So he's just about to try and start to get on me, to start doing his purring and settling down.
Doing that. Oh, they're so sweet when they do that. Okay, so thinking broadly, so what keeps us up? What gets in the way of a good night's sleep? And most of us can probably think about it. And, you know, things like noises, the heating, dripping tap, traffic, neighbours, computers, music, snoring, the lights. I mean, what's really interesting, I had one family that I worked with, and they said, we've got a real problem because their house was right outside the street lamp, and it didn't matter how many blackout blinds, because there's always that tiny little bit in the corners that you can't get rid of. And they said, it's just so bright and there's nothing we can do. Should we write to the council and see if they can turn it off at a certain time? And actually there are some places that they will do that, they will turn it off, but it's usually not until about midnight, by the way. And unfortunately they didn't do it, but then we just had to sort of think about, you know, could we put extra things to the side? I
always use the eye mask. I have an eye mask because it's got to be dark, and you're right, even with blackout ones you get those chinks every you know, few spaces. So
temperature is really important, and it's one of the things we were talking about as well earlier, is the fact that it's really nice as part of the bedtime routine to have a bath. And what that does, it raises the temperature. And we know if you're feeling really warm and cozy, you can feel quite sleepy. But actually, when you're thinking about nighttime, we want you to actually have a bit of a lower temperature, because that's much more conducive to melatonin. If it's too hot or too cold, that's not conducive to raising those melatonin levels. So actually, when you've had that bath and you come out and the temperature drops, that's what we're looking for. So they'll keep warm, but we want the temperature drop, because that actually helps promote the melatonin release. Do you want to talk about worries, friendships and relationships, or shall I do that?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's just the natural things that, you know, if you've got those worries, if our young people are worried about what's happening at school, or they're actually, you know, for a lot of them, when you start to talk about if they're really not sleeping, what's going on, and it's often stuff on Snapchat is the most popular one, seems to be at the moment, and they all seem to communicate just not being able to switch off, and for some of them also being aware that sometimes the comments that are coming through or the chat lines that they're on, they can be quite disruptive and also quite negative, and then you can't sleep because you know they're just getting those messages coming through, and they're a bit like what I call picking a scab. So they've got to keep checking it and keep looking to see what the next thing is.
So this is what we need, really. These are all the good things. These are the tips and what you've learned and putting it all together, really. So having a nice bedroom that is nice and quiet, dark, cozy and calm, And ideally, it could be not cluttered. I mean, one of the things we know for the youngsters especially, that it could be full of toys. As you get to teenagers, then you've got more things like TV, the Xbox and PlayStation, and all of these things are quite distracting. And again, if we're using like TVs to go off to sleep, and as Teresa was saying, that one of the things she used to swear by is, I need to fall asleep using the TV. Whereas now you've got your book, haven't you?
Oh yes, yeah. I used to be an absolute avid, can't turn the television off because that's what makes me go to sleep. Actually, it didn't help me at all, really. I think it was just pure exhaustion at certain points, 2 o'clock in the morning. And actually I cannot sleep if there's light, and I cannot sleep properly if there's noise and things as well. So actually having that mask and that room dark, and the temperature's got to be just right. So I always like to have the window open slightly so there's just that fresh air as well. And you can't, you don't get that real settling without those things being in place.
And one of the things we also talked about is the fact that we know that there's a lot of times when you're feeling anxious, and when you're feeling anxious, or if you're feeling anxious about going to sleep, is how do we reduce that, and actually preparing ourselves and calming ourselves down, but also having a pen and paper by the bed. So when you do get those things that you need to just write down, you can do it and forget it. I mean, I've done this many a time and then got up in the morning, I don't understand what I've written there at all, but it doesn't matter, you've written it down. And that's quite useful, especially for teenagers. And we know this time of year, we've got a lot of our teenagers are doing exams, they're doing GCSEs, A levels, or even at uni, that a lot of them are doing their uni studies as well. So it's really important thinking, how can we help them? So if they're going to sleep and they're thinking about things, they've maybe done a lot of revising and something's come into the brain, they can write it down. And I know that my daughter, for example, she's doing law at the minute, and she's got 24-hour exams. So they start at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and finish 2 o'clock in the following day. And some of the students are actually doing the exams and finishing. They should take around sort of 8 hours, they say, finishing and pulling an all-nighter and doing it. Whereas some of them, interestingly enough, like my daughter, because she needs to sleep, she's doing about 6-hour stint, then going to bed and then waking up early and finishing it as well. But what she does do is, if she does wake up in the night, she's got pen and paper ready. If anything comes to her brain, she can start writing it down, so she doesn't have to worry about it. Older siblings, oh, that's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is, and it's just one that we added in because sometimes when you're trying to work out why someone isn't sleeping, and they're kind of 8 years old, and you're putting them to bed and you're doing all those things that we would advise, and then actually if their brother or their sister's actually on their phone or playing their PlayStation in the same room, then just not going to get to sleep. So kind of moving those things out of the bedroom.
Okay, so the bedtime routine, we just can't say this enough, how important it is to have a good bedtime routine. And that is the key to a really good night's sleep. It's the foundation for a good night's sleep, isn't it, Teresa?
Absolutely.
That is setting you up. So you should start your bedtime routine, or the child's bedtime routine, around an hour beforehand, before you're thinking of actually going to sleep. And that will start to set that routine up. If you do it every day, that's doing that anchor point, and set that circadian rhythm, that 24-hour clock. And then again, talking about this sort of like setting those anchor points, we need to wake up, don't we, Teresa? We need to go to work.
We have to go to work, yeah.
Yeah.
But I've also found as well that actually if you go past those anchor points, so we were talking earlier about, generally what I do in the week time is it depending on what time the cat and dog get me up. So I love the winter because the dark mornings they don't do it, and I love that. But in the summer they definitely get me up because it's daytime, and as far as they're concerned that means breakfast. But at the weekends, because I can get up, give them their food, and then go back to bed and have that little bit longer to sleep. And so my always laughs at me. So my lie-in generally on a weekend is about 8 o'clock to 8:30, which doesn't class as a lie-in according to him. A lie-in is much longer, but I know that if I go past that anchor point, actually I'm really groggy, and actually I'm not good, and my whole day is quite rubbish. So it's as bad as not having enough sleep.
Yeah. And as we were saying, sort of, I think we need to do it snooze or lose, don't you?
Absolutely. So our snooze or lose equations.
Yeah.
So the Xbox, it's kind of, you know, it's exciting. It hypervigilates our brain, depending on the kind of games they're playing as well, that can get even more kind of, and I know a lot of them, and one of the things that we see a lot of parents moan about is when they're online gaming is kind of the level of shouting that they're doing, the level of swearing they're doing. So actually they're kind of hypervigilant, hyped up as well. Caffeine, which we discussed earlier, is a stimulant. So if you remember that adenosine, if you're going to put caffeine into the diet, you're just not going to get that adenosine. It's going to override it. The internet and TV is excitant, you know, depending on what they're kind of watching, it can be really, really good. Can't put down that iPad because you just want to watch the next series because it's right on a cliffhanger. And we all know what it's like being on the internet. You can lose hours on there when you're looking at things. And sugar is an irritant, so actually adding sugar into the diet and having that late in the day can be really irritant for those moods as well. And if you put all four of those together, you've definitely got a child insomniac. So looking at how you get those out of the system and out of that kind of bedtime routine time.
I'm going back one, sorry. The reason I'm going back one, so I just thought, you know, one of the things you were saying, because I think that's really key, isn't it? When we're talking about the bedtime routine and going off to sleep, you kind of have to fake it until you make it, which we'll talk about in a minute. But especially when we're talking about those sleep associations, is as a parent, if we're still in that ritual of putting our children to bed because they're young enough, I mean, obviously I wouldn't be doing that to my older children, but you are for your younger children. And it's what are we saying and how are we supporting them going off to sleep? So when you're doing that bedtime routine, you're doing that last bit, you're having that bath or the wash, you're going into the bedroom's nice and calm and dark, you're having that story, so you're having that really nice shared time together, which is a really nice calming time. And then once you've done that, you can tuck them into bed and say that bedtime mantra. Now, when I first mentioned this to Teresa, she said, oh yeah, I used to do that. But we've all done it as parents. We have a bedtime mantra. We say the same thing every day, every night as the child's going off to sleep. And if it's a nice positive thing, night, night, see you in the morning, love you, and you give them a kiss, and you might stroke the back of their head or put a little bit of pressure on their shoulder as they're settling down, because we know that massage is another way of sort of calming the body down, and it stays in the body, you know, that pressure point for around 4 hours. So if you're using all of those stimulations to actually settle stimulations, but the opposite stimulations to settle them down into a nice good sleep with the smells, your voice, calming environment, and that's setting up a really good sleep association in a nice cozy bed. And the other thing we were talking about as well is that if you've got a child that's anxious at night and really likes to have the parents nearby, is thinking about whether there's something you wear that smells of you so they can settle down and they can put it around a teddy bear or whatever they want. Again, that sleep association, and they can smell, have the smell of you as they go off to sleep as well. So that actually once they're settled, you can walk away, leave the room. And obviously there are sleep techniques and things like that if there's continued problems. But I just thought I'd remembered that. I thought, oh, didn't mention that last time. And the other thing is, as we were saying about coming off, you're not using any of those devices. I had one family who decided that after, I think it's about 6 o'clock, all of their devices would go off. So they won't allow any of their mobile phones or anything to go upstairs into the bedrooms. So they stay downstairs, they're plugged in downstairs, and they stay downstairs. And they've all done that in the family. That fills me a bit, makes me slightly anxious to do that. But I think it would be a really good routine, and it would be a really good thing to try as well.
Yes, I had a screaming no in my head. I was thinking of my latest box set when you said that.
I know, it's so difficult. And again, you know, it's really difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. But also, I think there's that thing that we do when, you know that I've got cut-off limits and I can stick to them now. And I think that's also how we then model it, don't we, to our children.
Okay, so the no later than, I mean, these are idealistic and we know that this is not going to be practical for most people, but this is, if you looked at a lot of the research, this is what the idealistic thing is, no later than. So the good old caffeine, I mean, we're fine, Teresa, you know, it doesn't bother us.
We don't have that problem.
We don't have that problem. We don't go into coffee shops. Exercise, I think this is a really tricky one. It says no later than afternoon. A lot of us will go and do our exercise classes, go out for a run or a cycle when we finish work, because we find that that's part of our relaxation. But I think what we've got to think about is if we did exercise really late at night, when we want to go to sleep, when we're exercising, we're producing a lot of that cortisol hormone to keep us alert, and adrenaline's going, endorphins are going. So, you know, that is raising all of that wakefulness rather than helping that melatonin to start to come into play. So it's just thinking about how can you then start to calm everything down again. What do you need? So you need calming environment, you need the darkness, maybe get a book out if you're Teresa, and lie down, and then you'll fall asleep, don't you, Teresa?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it works a charm for me. I've tried it since then, actually, and just lying on the sofa one Sunday afternoon, started reading, and I was like, bulk, straight asleep. And I was like, wow, this is really great.
It's good. That's going to be the cure-all, I think, you know. Electronics, so we've already spoken about that, you know, trying to remove electronics as much as you can. Alcohol, that's a really interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, you know, drink alcohol or say, actually, when I have a drink, I sleep really well. And the problem with alcohol is that you do tend to go bonk straight out, but you wake a lot sooner, and you're not getting that deep sleep that is really the restorative sleep. You're actually in a very light sleep, and you tend to wake a lot earlier. So it actually is kind of defeatist, and you're not getting the real sleep that you need.
Yeah, and also you usually get a bit of a hangover if you drink a lot.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And it's harder then to set the anchor points in the morning, isn't it, and wake up on time. Large meal, we've all done that, haven't we? Had a meal too late and sat there and gone, I ate too much.
Yeah,
it's really difficult to fall asleep. So again, you can have that a little bit of a gap before you go to sleep, just to let that the digestion start to work, so you haven't got that feeling of heaviness before you go to sleep. Daytime naps. Now, we've talked about daytime naps. Daytime naps, not a bad thing, as long as they're not too close to bedtime, and as long as you're not having them for hours and hours during the day, because it does accumulate. And if you've got to think of it as a 24-hour circadian clock and body clock, and if we start to have long daytime naps, that's going to start to interfere with our nighttime sleeping.
And you're not going to get that build up, are you, of the adenosine again, because if you kind of triggered it into your sleep, and then you've had quite a long nap, and then you wake up, you haven't got enough time to build it up, and that's where you start to get those real changes in your circadian rhythm.
Yeah. Okay, so we like this. Fake it until you make it. And as we said earlier, sleep is one of those funny things, isn't it? You go to bed, you lie down, and you pretend to sleep to get to sleep. But it's almost the same as if you want to change the habit, if you want to change your bedtime routines or change any elements in that routine, or even the environment, you have to pretend to do it for a time before it becomes routine. So what we want you to go away with today is to think about all of the things that we've said about the sleep science, you know, the circadian rhythms, all the different hormones and how they're at work, and how you can actually start to train the body clock to work in sync with what you want it to be, and actually start to develop a really good bedtime routine, look at the environment and make those improvements. We talk about rewards. So what rewards do we think would be a really good reward for adults? What do you think? I mean, for children, we've got star charts. One of the ones I used to do with children was, I'd say, okay, a week star chart would be just a blank piece of black paper or a dark blue paper, and the child would have stars. So they have like a little bright stars, and they could put them on every morning if whether they've slept or not. So they put them on, and then parents will put an extra couple on, you know, depending how well they've slept, and then they build it up, and eventually, when they've got a really starry night, we'll call it the starry star chart, they get a picture of the moon to say you've achieved it, you've done it, you've got a good bedtime routine, and it's fantastic.
I think that would look great on a wall, wouldn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah, or on the ceiling even. I mean, gosh,
Yeah.
yeah, have to be really creative here, can't we? But what about parents? I think, because I think, again, when as parents, as adults, we all have periods of time when we don't sleep as well, and we need to start thinking about how can we retrain our bodies and get into that good environment. What do we do? And, how do we start to remove our devices, or reduce when we're eating, think about when we're eating, or reduce the amount of light that's coming into the bedroom. All of those kind of things, those little things that we can amend, can't we? So
And I think with rewards, you have to be slightly creative around that, don't you? Because otherwise, if you only think kind of monetary rewards or item rewards, you end up with what we call reward inflation. And then parents feel really frustrated because, I'll do that because you're going to give me that. And then actually you're going to have to up that because otherwise I'm not doing it either. So actually what you need to do is kind of think creatively, so that kind of chart, particularly when they're younger. When they're older, it's also about how you can kind of engage them in being really responsible for their health as well as their well-being as well. And I think what I've noticed, particularly over the kind of last kind of 8 years or so, is that our young people, as they're getting older and into their teenage years, a lot of them are coming in and saying to me, actually, I'm really quite interested in my health. I want to know a little bit more about this, because I want to be as fit and healthy as I can be. And I love this about them. I love the fact that there's that kind of focus around as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really good, isn't it? I suppose, with the youngsters, it's the parentings that are helping make those choices, whereas with the older children, the adolescents, actually teaching them and helping them understand about sleep. And what we find is that when people understand about sleep, understand about the anchor points, understand about circadian rhythms and the way melatonin and cortisol are working, and the sleep pressure and everything's working, it makes more sense about why we're saying, and why bedtime routine is really important, why the environment's really important. That makes much more sense to people. And I think if we can have those conversations with the adolescents, and then they can start to take some responsibility as well. How can they improve? What increments, what tiny little increments, baby fairy steps, I used to say, what can you change? I know it's really difficult because you really want to know what's going on in Snapchat, or you really want to check Facebook. What little changes can you make to make it a little bit better for you, so you feel better as well in yourself? So talking about help and support, really. So sleep apps. Sorry, Teresa, this is your sleep apps. You know these all.
Sleep apps. So on Calm, you've got the sleep stories, and again, it's about balancing that thing. So not just giving them a phone and going listen to that story, because then you're just defeating the object. So it's about making sure that that's part of the that routine. There's Headspace as well that often has like meditations and things, and then you've got the Snaps app, which was set up by Professor Greengrass, who's one of our country's leading experts around sleep. And the baby sleep coach have got little ones around how you might help them to sleep as well. Sleep aids. So a lot of people are talking earlier around things like white noise. There are some apps around. I know some of the teenagers have told me about some really quite bizarre noises, but they claim that they help them sleep. Daylight lamps. So actually mimicking that day to night light that happens, and then that light brightening as they gradually wake up as well, can be helpful. And I know a few people from earlier on today were saying about red lamps, which seems to be a new thing, and having those things. And I know for a young person that was in one of the sleep clinics in London, they changed the light bulb in the bedroom so that it actually mimicked, and it was a different type of light bulb, so the light that was emitting was mimicking the actual light that was required. And then online sleep help, we've got the Sleep Charity and the Sleep Council. Amazing, unbelievable amount of information on there around every kind of element, and also looking at when to get that further help if it's something that then falls into the category of the parasomnias. Every Mind Matters, and obviously the NHS website as well. But there is quite a lot up there around sleep.
Yeah.
We had a few questions, and one of the first ones, which I think we can't labour the point enough, was around You know, is it important to set that bedtime routine every night? Absolutely. And what I've said to parents is, you know, particularly when if you've got a child that doesn't sleep and you're trying to address that sleep, like I explained earlier, you know, you're not going to do it overnight, and it does take a bit of time to get into a really good routine. I know with mine, and I can't even begin to stress enough how hard that was to do, but actually once you made your mind up about doing it and really doing it, it was like having a boomerang that just kept coming back every, you know, and just going, right, okay, back to bed, having that nighttime mantra, putting them back into bed, knowing that they're probably going to be coming back. And eventually that, I think I actually went to check when it finally started to work and it hadn't been out in the usual normal time. I actually had to go up and check that he was okay, because I got so used to it as well. But just kind of, it is really important, those anchor points of getting up and going to bed and having those set times. It actually sets our circadian rhythm so that we can do that.
And interesting, the next one, which was around, you know, if my child goes to bed at 8:30 but doesn't fall asleep until midnight, and I think again, sort of like talking around, you know, how do I help my child go to sleep when he wants to stay up, or with us. So again, that's talking around that really good sleep routines, but also when you're making those changes, see what they are actually doing now, not making a huge change and going, right, I'm not going to put them to bed at 8:30 and they're not falling asleep until midnight. So what you might need to do, and I know it sounds really strange when we're saying it, you might need to start, your starting point might be midnight, and then working backwards slowly until you've got it to the time that actually their body clock's now adjusting. And you might need to do that slowly, but still waking them up at the same time every morning. And that's really important. Where do I go to get help? Now, it's a really tricky thing, because unlike in some areas, you've got, for instance, Southampton, you've got the Southampton Sleep Council that help. You've got Sleep Scotland up in Scotland. We actually haven't got anything in Sussex like that. So we haven't got a sleep service as such. But what we have got, we've got some really good experienced school nurses and health visitors who will be able to point you in the right direction. And also they can do some sleep assessments and a bit of sleep work and good sleep hygiene with you as well. So it's really important to touch base with them, because they're really supportive. And I've done quite a bit of training with a lot of the health visitors locally as well. Natural remedies. Well, we've talked about melatonin. Do you want to talk a little bit more about melatonin, or should I mention gummy bears at all?
Oh yeah, so you know, we've heard a lot of around parents obtaining gummy bears from America that contain melatonin, and we can't advise those at all, because what we've know is that when they've researched into what's contained in them, is very variable, and you don't know actually what you're getting or how much of anything is in that. And again, going back to that sleep routine, even if you were to be prescribed something like melatonin, if that routine is not in place and they are having lots of you know, fizzy drinks and sweets, and they're not actually got that routine in place, the melatonin won't work, because particularly if they're on electronics as well, because it's back to those key hormones, that adenosine and melatonin, switching those parts of the brains off. And even if you give them melatonin, that won't work. In terms of other medications, you know, they don't mimic sleep as a natural thing. You know, they're only temporary measures, and that doesn't, even for adults, there are no permanent medications that actually induce natural sleep. When we look at natural remedies, so alongside those really important anchor points and those routines, and having those mantras and having that routine that helps them to start to feel comfortable and signals to them that it's bedtime, is there are things like the lavender oils, the pillow sprays. You know, through the pandemic, I worked in a secure centre for young people, all the way through the whole of the COVID pandemic. And obviously in that setting, a lot of young people struggled to sleep, and we used a lot of lavender baths, hand creams, pillow sprays. We didn't prescribe the medication for sleep, because actually what we wanted to do was promote that natural sleep. Most of them, it absolutely worked wonders for them. So they're the kind of things that really do help. help. And also what we got for those that have a lot of anxieties, we had, and they used to sell them in the works. I haven't been in there for a long time, but we got them like these, they're kind of like little worry monsters, and they could write down their worries and then pop it into the mouth and zip the mouth up, so the worries was in there as well.
That's a lovely idea. And also I think the other thing is things like chamomile tea. I love chamomile tea. I think it's great. And you know, things like that. It's quite interesting, isn't it, that we tend to sort of think that a lot of the time there might be a medicine, but actually there's a lot of things that we're doing. And also some of the food stuff we were talking around.
Bananas is a great one. Lettuce is another one that promotes sleep.
So munching a bit of lettuce before you want to go to sleep. Lettuce tea, that's our next one. I think we'll experiment with that one, shall we?
And I think that's a common one, the child that wants to stay with you. And I think, you know, I can remember doing that when I was a child. You know, if my mum had got some sort of, you know, something going on downstairs, I was a master creeper down the stairs and looking through the banisters at what was going on. But I very quickly got chased back up to bed again. But I think, you know, it's partly it's about the curiosity, but it's about also helping them with that sleep, around those routines and structures. And if you've got routines and structures throughout your life, it actually reduces your stress and it actually reduces anxiety, because you don't have to think about what's going to come next, because we know what's going to come next, and our bodies fit into that circadian rhythm, and naturally we expect them to go to sleep. So although it's hard work to set that up and to manage that and to help that child through all of it, putting it in place ultimately will reduce that anxiety and stress that they feel around that time. And again, that sleep association. So the minute they've kind of got into that habit over a 3 or 4 night period, then their body starts to think, well, actually, I'm only going to sleep if I've got mum next to me. And so getting that back out of that pattern is reversing it back out.
And just that reassurance, isn't it? And that using there's a couple of different techniques around actually trying to strengthen them staying in their bedroom rather than coming out of their bedroom. So you're strengthening that environment is for sleep, and it's okay, and it's really safe, and it's a place that they want to go and they associate with going to sleep. And there's a lot of techniques that you can talk through with the health visitor or with the school nurse around how you can actually, if you've got a child that won't sleep unless you're next to them, and how you can gradually withdraw out of the bedroom, which doesn't distress them or yourselves, because it's quite hard to do that, isn't it?
It is.
And you can work through a really nice model and slowly sort of extract yourself from the bedroom. You both feel safe to do that.
And I think that last one around referrals is via, you know, again, via your school nursing services and health visitors, who can then kind of make those recommendations to GPs. We don't actually have a sleep service within our service at all, although we get to deal with a lot of sleep issues, obviously. We don't have a specific service for it. So making sure that you've had that contact, particularly with your school nursing for school age children, that's the first point of call.
Yeah, I think that's it. So this is our references, and thank you so much for coming this evening,
especially this time of night.
Yeah, and hopefully you can switch the computer off now, go and read a book, have a bit of chamomile tea, and go and have a really good night's sleep. Thank you so much
for me. It's going to be absolutely starting my routine of how I switch from work to home, and just reducing all of that stuff, so that eventually when my alarm goes off on my watch, I'll know it's ready for bed.
Yeah, so night from both myself and Teresa.